This morning we're going to continue our study of the book of Ruth. So if you have your Bible and you want to turn and follow along, we'll be in Ruth chapter 3 this morning. Remember, the book of Ruth is a love story, but it's also an origin story. It has two purposes in that sense in the Old Testament. It's a love story. It shows the seemingly hopeless widow Ruth, how she finds a husband and she lives, happily ever after. It's what we would say today, right? That's how those stories work out. It's also an origin story in that it explains the lineage of King David. This book in your Bible, in our Bibles, comes right before 1 Samuel, and then we know that God introduces the kingdom period in Israel, and David becomes king, the greatest king of Israel, and Ruth is David's great-grandmother. So this is telling where David's family came from. It's really telling us how God preserved the line of David through the tumultuous times of the judges, that very risky time in the history of Israel, and yet God was preserving the family of David through that time. As a love story, of course, there are two hero characters. There's Ruth. She's the destitute but faithful widow, right? She's poor. She doesn't have anything going for her. She's a foreigner, and yet she's the one who's going to be the love interest. And it has Boaz. He's the prosperous and kind landowner, right? He's the tall, dark, and handsome. He's got everything. He's got the land. He's got the opportunity to be a help to Ruth. So those are the two main characters. In some ways, then, you could say that chapter 1 introduces Ruth. It describes her plight, how hopeless she is, how difficult things are for her, and yet how she's faithful. She's a lovely person still, the way that she responds to things, and she's placing herself in the hands of God. She's trusting God for what is going to happen for her future. Chapter 2 introduces Boaz, and we can see his wealth, his respectability, his kindness, that he's a good man, a good kind of man. Now, of course, then, chapter 3, like in any love story, is the critical chapter. We know who Ruth is. We know who Boaz is. And the question for all love stories is, well, how is that ever going to work out? How can they possibly meet? How could any circumstances ever align that they could fall in love, that they could become a couple, that they could get married? How will it work out, right? This is the critical chapter. So we have all the questions we normally have in a love story. So Boaz is wealthy. He's the eligible bachelor. But is he interested in Ruth romantically, right? You have to ask yourself. Some of you ladies are like, yeah, we know the story. You guys don't understand as well as we do. But that's the question, right? So Ruth is in need. Boaz is a wealthy guy who could help her. But is there any chemistry there, right? Is Boaz actually interested in Ruth, or is he just a nice guy? Ruth is honorable. But does she really have any chance with Boaz? Like, she's a good person, but that's a little hard to believe, right? She's a nobody. She's a foreigner. She would be connected to the people of Moab and all the evil history that was connected to them in the eyes of the people of Israel. Would she really have any chance with Boaz? How can the circumstances that naturally separate them, that they're of different socioeconomic classes, that they have no one to speak for them, there's no one to be an intermediary and kind of the natural matchmaker in that culture for them, that Ruth is a foreigner and Boaz would be discouraged from marrying her because she's not descended from the people of Israel? How can those things be overcome? That's the question in this chapter. How are we going to fit this puzzle together? Under what circumstances could they possibly discover an affection for one another, right? That's the maddening part about all the love stories that we tell, right? Is how could things align that these people could be in the right place at the right time? Even if they do have feelings for each other, is there any way that they can express that? Is there any cultural way for them that to come about? All of those are the questions coming up in chapter 3. How is God going to bring this together? And I think that will be answered, at least for the most part, in this chapter. So we're going to read the whole chapter this morning. We'll talk about some of it today and some of it next week. But if you have your Bible and you want to follow along, chapter 3 in the book of Ruth says this: Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. For when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." And she replied, "All that you say, I will do." So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." And he said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. For all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning." So she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before one could recognize another. And he said, "Let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor." And he said, "Bring the garment you are wearing and hold it out." So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then she went into the city. And when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, "How did you fare, my daughter?" Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said to me, 'You must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law.'" She replied, "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today." Now again, this is a cliffhanger. I'm purposely leaving you on a cliffhanger, but you have your own Bible. Go home and read the story yourself. I'm not keeping it back from you. We're just studying a little piece at a time, but if you can't stand it, read it and finish it so you know what happens. But it's important, if we look at chapter 3, to take notice that while Ruth is the heroine of her story, it's often Naomi, her mother-in-law, who sets the emotional tone. Naomi says the feelings that are going on. So Ruth oftentimes may have these feelings, but she's not the one saying them. It's Naomi's the one who gives voice to the condition of the emotions that Ruth and Naomi are going through. So in chapter 1, it's Naomi who says that people should call her Mara, for God has made her bitter. That Naomi and Ruth are bitter, they're disappointed, they've been persecuted, they feel like God is against them because their husbands have died, they have nothing, they're left on their own. That's how Ruth feels. Well, Ruth doesn't say it. Naomi's the one that kind of gives voice for what things feel like. In chapter 2, it's Naomi who describes that Boaz's kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead, when she sees how Boaz provided for Ruth. Now, Ruth feels that kindness too. Ruth had it expressed to her, but it's Naomi that says, "Hey, this is a really good guy. He's been kind to us in a very deep way." So, and just a hint, by the way, at the end of the book, it will be Naomi who will give voice to the restoration and the blessing of God on Ruth. Naomi's going to be the one that we hear it from, even though Ruth is the one that experiences. So here, it's the words of Naomi at the beginning of this chapter that clue us into an important shift, that God has restored the hope of rest for Naomi and Ruth. And to understand this better, I hope that you've been following along in the story, because there has been a major change that's happened in just this short season. Remember, we're talking about one barley harvest season. This whole story is taking place over this relatively short amount of time, that Naomi and Ruth come back to Bethlehem just in time for the barley harvest. And before it's over, when they're still winnowing their grain or taking off the husks of the grain and getting ready to store it, that all this is taking place. Naomi is ready now to hope for rest for Ruth. Now, this is a word for rest that is like a resting place. It's a place where you would have true peace, not quite paradise, but a place where you would belong, the place you were meant to be, so that you would be at rest. When you're there, you can be with an expected sense of peace. This is where I was meant to be. I'm relaxed. For instance, and maybe the best example of this is Genesis chapter 8, verse 9. That's the story of Noah, right? When at the end of the flood, when Noah is looking for dry land to make sure that they can open the ark, he begins to send out birds, right, to see if they can find a place to land. And it says that at one point he sends out a dove, and she finds no place to set her foot upon. So she comes back to the ark. She had no place that she could say, okay, this is where I belong. The earth was still too covered with water. That's the resting place for Ruth, that Naomi is saying, I think that I should be helping you find the place that you belong, the resting place, not just for you physically, but for your soul. It's important to recognize then that Naomi has had birthed in her a hope that was lost. Sometime during this short period of the harvest, Naomi went from Mara, bitter, to maybe God still does have a plan for me. When she had come back to Bethlehem, she said, look, it's over. In fact, it's important to remember that when Naomi was leaving Moab, she turned to Ruth and Orpah, her daughters-in-laws, and she told them, she said, I want you to go back and find a husband here. Don't come with me. My life is over. God's against me. Everything has fallen apart with me. If you come with me, it's just going to end in despair and misery. Why don't you go back to Moab? It'll be hard, but you'll find rest with a husband. She said, you belong here. And Ruth had said, no, it's not for me. I must go with you. Where you go, I'll go. Where you lodge, I'll lodge. Where you die, I'll die. I'm going with you. Your God will be my God. Ruth made that commitment to go with her. But Naomi had said at that time, well, if you don't go back to Moab, you're not going to have rest. That's over for me. I've reached the end. But something has happened. In just these few days, maybe a couple of weeks, Naomi now suddenly wakes up one morning and she says, you know what? Maybe there is a little bit of hope. Should I not be looking for a place of rest, a place where you belong, Ruth? Remember, it was Ruth who suggested to go out and glean in the fields at the beginning of chapter 2. I actually think, and I don't know this for sure, but I think we can read between the lines that Naomi was depressed. At the end of chapter 1, Naomi says, I'm Mara, I'm bitter, God's against me. And in chapter 2, Ruth says, hey, Naomi, you think it'd be okay if I went out in the fields and tried to glean? Ruth is saying, Naomi, we're going to have to get off the couch and try to get some food. I know it looks like the end for us. I don't know what to do either, but I can at least go out and try to collect some barley since they're harvesting right now. And Naomi seems to say, well, I guess whatever you want to do, Ruth. It's not until Ruth comes back having met Boaz and brings back some of the grain that Boaz gave her and has all of the grain that she was able to glean that day that something begins to spark in Naomi, that she has hope. And now Naomi is ready to go full matchmaker, right? Naomi springs into plan. Remember, she only had 2 sons, as far as we know. I don't know if she lost any children, but we only know that she had 2 adult sons who were married. She's never gotten to be matchmaker for a daughter before. I don't know if that's really her desire. But it's what she always wanted to do. Right now, she's got a scheme. She says, okay, Ruth, maybe we do have some hope. I think I have a plan, right? She believes that Boaz has been taking special notice of Ruth. And she even has the boldness to believe that Boaz might marry her. Notwithstanding the great distance between them, again, financially and in socioeconomic terms, they're not of the same class at this point. Ruth is a foreigner from Moab. There's all the kinds of opposition. And yet here Naomi, who had been bitter and hopeless, is now saying, oh yeah, I think we can accomplish that. I think Boaz, the wealthy man around town, the guy who owns all this land, I think he might marry you. That's a dramatic change for Naomi. And I think Ruth has been experiencing it too, just over these few days and over this season. Ruth and Naomi were truly in desperate poverty, but the kindness of Boaz has awakened in Naomi the ability to hope for rest. And we're seeing in this story over and over. It's not just a simple allegory where we say this represents this in God, but we have these themes about who God is. That it is the kindness of God that brings someone like Naomi out of hopelessness and says, you know what? Maybe there is just the chance that there is a possible rest for me. Do you see what I'm saying? You're not Boaz, you're not Ruth. I understand that. Why would God have a story that's really just a love story in the Bible? Because it brings up themes like this that people can say, I was one that I thought it was over for me. If you'd have seen the circumstances of my life, I said, there's nothing left for me. Everything's against me in this world. And then just over a matter of days or a couple of weeks, the kindness of God came into my life through one person or another circumstance. And I kind of remembered maybe there is the chance of hope for rest for me, a place where I really belong. Now, Naomi has a scheme that she believes will bring Boaz and Ruth together so that we can all find out if he's really interested enough to marry her. So she's the one that has a plan. She's the elder woman in this relationship that says, okay, I think I can figure out a way to manipulate the circumstances so that we can get you two together. We don't get to know exactly how excited Ruth was about all of the details of this. Sometimes I wonder if Ruth was listening to Naomi saying, oh, great for you. You get to plan all this stuff out. I have to go do it, right? I'm the one that has to take this chance. But we do know that Ruth was at least ultimately approving of it because it's her bravery that pulls it off. It's Naomi's plan, but it's Ruth's bravery. For instance, Ruth is the one who bravely makes herself ready. Ruth has to make herself ready to attract Boaz, or it would probably be better to say to make herself presentable to Boaz. I don't want to put it too plainly, but Naomi says, hey, I've got a plan, Ruth, but first, you're going to need a shower, right? This is going to require, you're going to have to go clean up a little bit. She says, I want you to wash yourself, anoint yourself, put on your cloak. These are the things that we know exactly what she's doing, right? She's getting dressed. She's making herself presentable. Remember, when Ruth and Boaz have met before this, they met in the harvest fields. This might be a romantic place to meet, but it wasn't a romantic place for a proposal, right? It was hot. It was dusty. It was dry. Ruth was gleaning. She's bending over all day, picking up the grain. Boaz is there in charge of his men. They're working hard for the day, just like harvest is busy for our farmers now, and they work long days, and their wives say, yeah, they've been gone since early this morning. They won't even come home. We'll have to take them some lunch. And Boaz and his men, and maybe even the neighbors, would all come together, and they would work as soon as it was light till it was dark, day after day after day, trying to bring in the harvest while the weather was good. So it had been not a greatest time to getting to know each other for Boaz and Ruth. Now Ruth is going to bathe herself. She's going to put on her best clothing, and she's going to try to meet Boaz in a more socially acceptable way, right? This would be a way that would identify, yeah, it was nice to meet you, but I'm interested in you, and see if Boaz is interested in her. Now, we don't need to superimpose what I think is really pretty much the stupidity of the modern beauty industry. So I'm not saying that Ruth goes back to her room and she has this kind of cream. And really, we know that what we're affected by now is more advertising than anything else, right? So I'm not condoning all the foolishness of today's like beauty industry that we have. We are also looking at something that's timeless, okay? No matter what culture, no matter what time, when it was Ruth wanting to make herself presentable to Boaz, she had a routine, right? She knew what she was about. She got herself clean. She got herself dressed. She wanted to make herself presentable to him. She wanted to appear in her best light. There's something inescapable about how this works. And Ruth is brave enough to attempt Naomi's suggestion. Again, Naomi has the plan, but it's Ruth that has to take a deep breath and say, I'm going to put myself into the middle of this situation. It's interesting to remember, do you forget that God brought Eve to Adam in the Garden of Eden? So again, we can recognize today, and some of you ladies might even say, look, the way beauty products are marketed to me, I've sworn that stuff off. It's just ridiculous. They're just trying to get all my money. I'm not really into that kind of stuff. Hey, that's fine with me. I think you're probably right. But do understand that there's something that's inescapable for Ruth about wanting to be presentable. That is part of who we are. That when God made man and woman, he made Eve and he brought her to Adam. He presented her to Adam. That isn't something that we've superimposed on ourselves. There is at least part of that comes from nature. It comes from who we are. And in fact, there's a reason that God made us that way. And it's because it reflects the church getting ready to meet the returning Jesus. And I'm not making this up. Again, this isn't us allegorizing the text. This is exactly what the Apostle Paul tells us in the book of Ephesians. when he talks about husbands and wives, he says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by a washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without any spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. This is an interesting verse, and I'm not able to really even unpack it all the way, and I think there's things that I don't understand about it all the way, but what it is saying is that way that God made Eve and brought her to Adam, and this willingness in Ruth, again, don't be modern with this, not to make herself sexually attractive, not to go out and buy all the beauty products today so that you can be in tune with everybody else, so that you can have the popular thing that you're wearing. And yet, at a very basic level, she was willing to make herself presentable. She wanted to be presented to Boaz. And there's something that God built into the very world itself, because he has a church that wants to be presentable to the coming bridegroom. That actually is our Christian life. Why do we serve and obey God? Is it because he will punish us if we don't? Is it because we're afraid of the consequences? Those are sometimes our motivations. But the deeper motivation, once we come to know who Jesus is because we love him. We have an inner drive, as a body at least, to be presented to him in holiness, to be presented to him in without blemish. You understand what I'm saying? In fact, the book of Revelation describes this very thing. John says, I heard what seemed to be the voice of a great multitude, like the roar of many waters, like the sound of mighty peals of thunder, crying out, Hallelujah, for the Lord our God, the Almighty reigns. Let us rejoice and exult and give him the glory, for the marriage of the Lamb has come, and the bride has made herself ready. He's talking about the church. It was granted her to clothe herself with fine linen, bright and pure, for the fine linen is the righteous deeds of the saints. Ruth, in this sense, is brave. She's willing to make herself ready. And we see in this a reflection of the church getting ready for the return of Christ. Not only did Ruth bravely make herself ready, but she bravely took a personal risk as well. Again, Naomi's good at cooking up plans, but it's Ruth who has to carry it out. And we're going to talk more next week about exactly what's transpiring between Ruth and Boaz. I don't know if it is what it looks like to you, but it might be. It is a risky situation that they're putting themselves in. At the most basic level, you can understand, and those of us, we know this from having to navigate our own romantic relationships, right? The risk is either she will be accepted or she will be rejected, right? I mean, that's the risk, right? She's going to put things out there. She's going to present herself to Boaz. Naomi says, I think now's the time. We're gonna try it now. I think it's worth it. But there is the very real possibility, of course, that Boaz can say, oh, you were interested in today's parlance, that he says, oh, I thought we were just friends. That's not going to happen in the Hebrew culture, right? But that's the possibility, right? That Boaz could say, well, I wasn't interested in you like that, Ruth. Or that he might say, oh, you're a really nice person. I could be interested in you, but there's just too many things in the way. You're a Moabite. I could never marry a Moabite. Sorry, Ruth, it's never going to work out. That is a very real possibility, that Naomi or Ruth here is taking a very personal risk. In fact, Ruth decides, at Naomi's suggestion, to meet Boaz in a public manner. This is their opportunity to do this in public. It is out in the open, in a sense, but she does it with secrecy. Why did she do it with secrecy? And again, we might talk more details about this next week, but at least one of the reasons is to protect his reputation, right? She is so different from him, maybe so out of the league that he should be in, that she's giving him the opportunity to reject her without having other people see it, right? That it's possible even that he would be so opposed to the marriage that he would say, I can't believe you would even think about that. How dare you approach me about this in public? How dare you think in front of my friends that I would actually agree to marry a Moabite? We don't know that would happen, but that does appear to be some of the reason why Naomi suggests that this be done secretly. That's why Ruth comes up quietly to lay down at his feet. It's in order to give an opportunity for rejection, maybe. And in a way that we're going to discuss in more detail, Ruth was willing to take great personal risk because she was trusting in the kindness of Boaz. Ruth and Naomi at this point are putting all their hopes in the kindness and generosity of Boaz. And in so doing, in the kindness and generosity of God. Again, let's go back to the same idea in Revelation 19, that same passage about the church being presented to Christ, that the fine linen that the church is wearing. All the symbolism in the book of Revelation is very meaningful, and the church is presented to Christ in fine linen. And John has this commentary, the fine linen is the righteous deeds of the saints. Why have the saints served? Why have they been willing to be obedient to God? It's because we want to be presentable to Him. I'll go even a step further. Why have we taken great risk as a Christian? John is writing in the book of Revelation at a time when many Christians are persecuted and even martyred for their faith. And he's encouraging them to continue to put themselves at risk for the name of Christ. And he's saying to them, don't you want to be dressed in the fine linen? Don't you want to be presentable to the bridegroom when he comes? It's going to take a personal risk. You're going to risk yourself in that. But you can trust that the bridegroom is worth it. Do you see this reflected in Ruth? Ruth is taking a great personal risk here. Something that would be very difficult in the dating scene today. We have similar risks. This is even more risky. And yet she's willing to do it because she believes that this bridegroom is worth it. His generosity, his kindness will win the day. So the moment of truth, the answer to the question of whether Boaz will accept Ruth is forced into this one important instance. In verse 8, this is the moment of truth, right? Naomi has set it up so that Ruth lays down while Boaz is sleeping. And when Boaz wakes up, it is in that millisecond, what is going to happen, right? Boaz wakes up and there's a woman laying at his feet. What's going to happen? Will he accept her? Will he reject her? It all boils down to that realization. And we know that this story has a happy ending, so I'm really not holding anything back from you. And we're going to talk more specifics about Boaz's response next week. But for today, notice that it's Ruth's boldness, it's Ruth's bravery that springs Boaz into action. That Boaz's rise to action was a response to the way that Ruth trusted in him. It's interesting that in verse 4, Naomi is relying on the fact that when we pull this plan off, Boaz will tell you what to do. Isn't that interesting? And very, very difficult. It must have been very difficult for Ruth to put all of her hopes in Boaz reacting. But Naomi says, no, that's the way to do it. For a man like Boaz, he's a man that's used to making decisions. He's a man that is, he's a worthy man. Let's put it in his court, and that will make him act. And there's something really interesting to think about in our relationship with God here. Now, God is sovereign. He is omnipotent. He's all-powerful. He can do whatever he wants. But the Bible also describes that there are certain things that compel God to action, that, in a sense, attract his attention. And I want to be very careful in what I'm saying here. I am not saying that we manipulate God into being different than who he is. No, that's not true at all. But once we know what God's character is, then we know if we act in a certain way, this is how he'll respond. He will be compelled to action. Does that make sense? That's the way heroes work, right? That's the way Superman works, right? Superman, we know, is not just he's not just a bold character. He's a hero. So if you put somebody in danger in front of Superman, he'll go into the phone booth and change, and he'll come and rescue them, right? That it doesn't change who Superman is. You don't manipulate him into doing something. You simply put what Superman will respond to in front of him, and he does it. And that's exactly what Naomi is doing here. Naomi says, if Boaz is the kind of man we think he is, If we put you in this situation, he'll tell you what to do. He'll take it from there. God himself is a loving, kind God, right? He's the God from the Exodus chapter 34. We've already said that we've seen references to him already in the story of Ruth, that he is merciful and loving, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love, the way it describes it. So God himself, it has a character that will respond to us when we place our faith in him. Do you see what Ruth has done here? Naomi has set her up so that Ruth says, I've thrown everything on you doing this, Boaz. And Naomi knows Boaz is the kind of guy, he'll do it. Do you see the reflection we're finding out about God? That we are told that if we place our faith in God, we will in no way be refused, right? If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you shall be saved. You will be saved. Why is that? Is it because we've manipulated God? Do we have to beg and plead, oh, please, God, save me, even though I know you don't want to? Well, no, he does want to. That's the kind of God he is. We simply put ourselves in that place of faith, and God rises to action, and he saves. This is what Boaz is doing. This is what Naomi is counting on. So what is it that Boaz will do immediately? When Boaz learns that it's Ruth, he recognizes her, and when we talk next week, he expresses affection to her. He does say, "Yeah, I like you too." Okay, we get that part. We're going to talk more about that. But then he immediately, at the end of the chapter, when Ruth comes back to Naomi, and Ruth tells her, "Look, this is how it went. He gave me some grain again because he wouldn't send me home empty-handed." And Naomi says two very important things. Number one, okay, Boaz is going to take it from here. He will not rest, she says. Now, this is a different word for rest in the Hebrew than the word. So it's very interesting, at least in the translation that we have. Verse 1 of chapter 3 is Naomi saying, Ruth, I need to find rest for you. The very last verse, verse 18, is Naomi saying, Boaz won't rest. So what's different? And they're actually different words. They're not the same word in the Hebrew. The word in the first verse is that word for a place that you belong, right? Like the dove was looking for a place to put her foot after the flood. This one is to be still, right? It's to be not moving. It's like inertia. It's rest in the sense that nothing is happening. In other words, Naomi is saying Boaz won't be lazy. Or, again, like inertia, once you've got him moving with this, he won't stop moving. He's going to carry this out. He will not rest. Is an interesting thought. Is that a positive thing? Yeah, it's a positive thing for Boaz. He's a man of action at this point. He's going to accomplish the thing. Isn't it interesting that David would later write in the Psalms, he would say, I lift up my eyes to the hills, from where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. An important verse, very famous verse. He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. You ever thought about that? That we praise God that he doesn't rest? God doesn't have to sleep. That means that I can go to bed at night because God doesn't, right? At the end of the day, I can say, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow with this cancer diagnosis. I don't know what's happened tomorrow with the fact that I don't have a job. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow with the fact that the kids are somewhere else and maybe they've been taken out of custody or whatever, the most tragic situation you can imagine. The things that affect our heart in a deep way and worry us, those are very real things. But at the end of the day, I can say to God, in a very real sense, God, I'm going to ask you to keep an eye on these things because I'm just human and I need to sleep for the next 8 hours. And God can stay awake for them. He doesn't sleep. He doesn't slumber. Do you see the reflection here between Boaz that Naomi says to Ruth, Ruth, you took a great risk to yourself. You placed yourself in subservience to Boaz. I mean, you put yourself at his feet. You threw yourself in dependence on him. But now, Boaz will take it from here. He will not rest. He'll take care of this the rest of the way, Ruth. It's a very real sense in that we need to learn to trust in God, saying, look, I've placed my faith in him. He will not rest. He can accomplish these things. Secondly, not only does she say he will not rest, she says he will settle the matter. He will settle the matter. That means he's going to figure out how to make it work that they can be married. And we're going to talk more about this. There are some cultural barriers that are in the way. There's some things that have to be overcome. In fact, we'll talk more about how Boaz immediately says, well, actually, there's a Redeemer nearer than I. Boaz says, yeah, I would like to marry you, Ruth, but there is an issue that we have to deal with first. We're going to have to find out how to make sure we do this right. And Boaz is going to have to accomplish that. But Naomi is very, very confident, right? She says, Boaz, he can figure it out. He can take care of it. I'm not even sure in this story, at least Boaz is that confident, but Naomi is. Naomi says, nope, Ruth, he will settle the matter. He will not rest, and he will take care of it. Again, let me just lastly this morning wrap up with this idea, thinking about who God is and how he settles the matter. Look what Paul says in Romans chapter 5. He says, God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And Paul describes how this works. He says, therefore, we have now been justified by his blood, much more shall we be saved by him from the wrath of God. For if while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his Son, much more now that we are reconciled, shall we be saved by his life. Paul is describing in very minute detail, even maybe a little bit confusing to you, this is how Jesus settled the matter. That when we place our faith in Christ, and people tell you, well, that sounds so simplistic. Some of you might have had a family member, or maybe someone you know who's not a believer, and when you became a Christian, maybe they expressed to you something like, oh, that's nice for you. But then when you pushed them about it, they said, you know what? I just don't understand how you verbally saying, okay, Jesus, I trust you as Lord, how that changes anything for you. How does that make life any different? What do you think that really changes in eternity? How does that work? And we say to them, Jesus takes care of it, right? What do we say? That's basically what we say. Well, I put my faith in Jesus, and I think he'll take care of it. And that's exactly what we're saying. We're saying, no, I have trusted to Jesus to settle the matter. That's what I'm telling you. He's taken care of it. Well, how does he pay for your sin? He does. He takes care of it. I couldn't. That's why I stopped trying. So I place my faith in him. He will not rest. He will settle the matter. That God himself had a plan to rescue us from our sins. And when we put ourselves at his feet, in a sense, like Ruth did, we put ourselves in that position of faith, we can have confidence. He will not rest. He will settle the matter. And sometimes we can't explain it to people, a little bit like love, right? Where people say, well, we can't explain how that works. We can't explain how God tugs at the heart in that way. And there's a sense in which we can't explain all of God's motives, but he takes care of it. He settles the matter for us.